Nira was born on a distant world, a place where power and strength were everything. Her species, Excitrians, were known for their unmatched abilities. As psychic prowess was the backbone of their empire. Each member of the race was expected to harness this power to its fullest potential from the moment they were born. Every Excitrian child was tested to see if they had the strength to contribute to their people's dominance across the galaxy. Nora had been no different. She had passed the tests, but there had been something about her, something that set her apart. She was different in ways that no one could explain. From the moment she could think clearly, she noticed the strange markings that covered her skin. They were irregular, not like the smooth, symmetrical patterns that marked every other Excitrian. Her people took pride in their perfect genetics, their flawless forms, their harmony with the universe itself. But Nero was an anomaly, and she knew it. She could never fully control the psychic abilities that were meant to define her people. The connection to the stars was weak within her. It felt as if something was blocking the energy that should have flowed through her veins. She was never able to lift objects with her mind or move faster than the average person. Her telepathic connection to others was faint, barely even noticeable. Even when she tried to connect with her peers, they only looked at her with disdain. Her heart sank every time she failed. But the real agony began when she was old enough to understand the truth about her condition. The elders of her kind had spoken of it in whispers, calling her an aberration, a flaw, a mistake. And though they spoke quietly, she could feel their cruel thoughts radiating off of them, as if they were screaming it to her face. They saw her as a disgrace to the Titrian race, a blemish that could not be allowed to live unchecked in a society where perfection was everything. Anything less than the pinnacle of their abilities was considered a failure. She couldn't even bring herself to look at the other children. They were all so much better than her. They excelled in everything, their minds sharp, their bodies strong, their powers growing exponentially as they honed their skills. While Nera struggled to understand what was happening to her, she had tried so hard to push past the blockages in her mind, to awaken the power within her. But every attempt only left her exhausted and frustrated. All she wanted was to be like them, to feel the strength that coursed through her people. But the more she tried, the more she felt like an outsider within her own skin. The disappointment that filled the eyes of her family, her teachers, and her peers was overwhelming. It was suffocating, and the weight of it crushed her with every passing day. They told her time and time again that she wasn't worthy, that she wasn't strong enough to be one of them. And eventually Nora stopped trying. She stopped caring about the tests, the lessons, the expectations that were thrust upon her. It wasn't long before they officially cast her aside. No one cared to notice her anymore. She became a shadow, a forgotten child. In a world of perfect beings, no one wanted her, and no one needed her. Her days were spent alone, wandering the vast halls of the city they had built so high into the sky, searching for a place to belong. But each corner she turned only reminded her of how different she was, how broken she felt. And yet she didn't want to stay here anymore. She didn't want to be surrounded by the judgment and cruelty that had shaped her existence. She couldn't stand the whispers that followed her wherever she went, the harsh stares that burned through her soul. So she made a decision one night when the stars were shining bright in the sky and the city was asleep. She stole a small ship from the fleet and fled the only place she had ever known, leaving behind her people, her home, and the memories that haunted her every step of the way. Nara had no destination in mind. She didn't care where the ship would take her, as long as it was far from this place, far from the rejection and the hopelessness that she felt deep in her heart. The only thing she desired now was freedom from the pain that had become her existence. The small ship drifted aimlessly through the void of space, its engines sputtering as Nira tried to navigate through the endless expanse of stars. She had no clear destination in mind. All she knew was that she had to escape the suffocating grit of her people, the constant reminders of her inadequacy. The thought of returning was unbearable, even if it meant wandering forever through the unknown. As the ship sailed through the darkness, she couldn't help but wonder what awaited her out there in the vastness of the galaxy. Would she find acceptance, or would she be cast aside once more in a universe full of beings stronger than her? She had no answers, but she had no choice but to keep moving forward. The silence of space was deafening, the only sound the hum of the ship's systems as they struggled to keep her alive. She had no fuel reserves left, and the food supply was running low. The days blurred into one another as she tried to keep the ship in working condition. But it became harder and harder. She was exhausted physically and mentally, her body aching from the strain, and her mind weighed down by the constant fear that she would never find a place to belong. The stars outside her viewport were beautiful, distant, and cold. She stared at them in silence as the loneliness crept into her soul. She had no one now, no family, no friends, just the endless expanse of space, and the haunting thought that perhaps she was truly alone in the universe. But then something happened, a flicker on the console, an alert, a signal reaching out from somewhere beyond the vast emptiness. Her heart leaped in her chest as she quickly adjusted the ship's trajectory, trying to lock onto the source of the signal. It was weak, but there was something there, a beacon, a human-made signal. She couldn't believe her eyes. She had heard of humans before, but never thought she would encounter them out here in the depths of space. They were a lesser species in the eyes of the Excitrians, beneath them in almost every way. But Nera felt an inexplicable pull toward them. The signal grew stronger as she approached her ship's systems, creaking under the pressure. She pushed forward with all her remaining strength, refusing to turn back. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, hope sparked inside her. Maybe this would be her chance to find something different. Maybe these humans could offer her something more than rejection. They didn't know her, they didn't know what she was, or what she had become. But maybe they wouldn't care. Maybe they would see her for what she truly was, a lost soul, trying to find a place to call home. As she neared the human colony, the ship's hull groaned as it hit the atmosphere, the controls becoming unresponsive. As she struggled to maintain a steady course, panic began to rise in her chest. The ship was falling apart beneath her hands. She had no control over it. All she could do was hold on and pray that she wouldn't crash into the surface below. She saw the colony in the distance, a small settlement barely noticeable among the barren landscape. It looked so fragile, so insignificant compared to the grand city of her people. But something about it drew her in with a force she couldn't explain. She saw a landing pad on the outskirts and aimed for it, desperately pulling the ship down toward it. With every ounce of energy she had left, the ground rushed up to meet her, and for a moment she thought it was the end. The ship shuddered as it hit the surface, and the metal groaned with the impact. But somehow she was alive. Somehow she had made it. She lay there on the cold floor of the ship, breathless, her heart racing. As the silence of the crash settled around her for a moment, she just sat there in the darkness, waiting for something, anything to happen. She had no idea who or what was waiting for her on this unknown world. But she knew she couldn't stay in the ship. She had to step outside to face whatever awaited her. It could be a new beginning, or another crushing rejection. But for the first time in a long time, Nara felt like she might have a chance, just a small chance, to escape the pain of her past, and maybe, just maybe, find a new future among the stars. The doors of the ship creaked open with a hiss, and Nera stepped out into the harsh light of the human colony, her legs unsteady beneath her. As she braced herself for what might come next, the air was thick with dust and the scent of metal, mixed with the dry earth of the barren landscape. She squinted against the bright sunlight, feeling a wave of anxiety wash over her. She had never been in a place like this before. It felt so alien, so distant from everything she had ever known. The colony was a small and unassuming place, a scattering of buildings, some of them metal, some of them made of stone, all huddled together in the shadow of a towering mountain range in the distance. The human structures looked fragile compared to the towering cities of the Avitrians. They were simple and utilitarian, a stark contrast to the grand designs of her own people. But something about it made her feel something that she hadn't felt in a long time. Curiosity, hope. She had to find out what this place was, and what these people were like, even if it meant facing the unknown. She had no plan, no idea what to do next. But the sudden realization hit her like a jolt of electricity. She was alone. There was no one from her world here, no Excitrian family, no friends, no one to judge her, no one to tell her she was weak and inferior. For the first time in her life, she was free. She wasn't sure what to make of it. The feeling was both liberating and terrifying. She took a tentative step forward, her feet sinking slightly into the dirt. As she walked slowly toward the settlement, her heart racing with every step, she didn't know what she was walking into. But she couldn't go back. There was no place for her back home. She had burned that bridge. The air was still and quiet, except for the distant hum of machinery and the occasional soft voice echoing through the streets of the colony. As she moved deeper into the settlement, the people of the colony began to notice her. They looked at her with wide eyes. Some seemed confused, others wary. A few even stepped back in surprise. Nora could see the looks of suspicion and fear on their faces. They didn't know what she was or where she came from. They could sense she was different, and it made them uneasy. Her appearance alone was enough to make them uncertain. Her alien markings were nothing like the human's own features, and her presence felt otherworldly to them. Nira instinctively pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, trying to hide as much of her strange appearance as possible. Though it didn't do much to ease their anxiety, a few of the humans whispered to one another, their voices low and cautious. But one man stepped forward, breaking the silence. His eyes narrowed as he studied her intently. His clothes were simple, a scientist's lab coat, stained with dirt and dust. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. There was something different about him, something that made her pause for a moment. He didn't seem afraid. He didn't flinch at the sight of her. Instead, he gave her a nod, as if he had been expecting her in some strange way. He didn't ask who she was or where she came from. Instead, he spoke in a calm, steady voice that immediately put her at ease. "You're not from around here," Ayuvi said, his words tinged with an accent she didn't quite understand. Nera hesitated, unsure how to respond. She had never been good at speaking to others, especially to humans. Her throat tightened as she tried to gather her thoughts, but the man smiled gently as if he could sense her uncertainty. "Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you," he said with a reassuring tone. "I've seen things stranger than you in my time. Here, come with me. I'll help you." His words were simple, but they carried a weight with them, something that made her feel a glimmer of hope in her chest. Maybe these humans weren't as fearful as she had thought. Maybe they would offer her something more than the rejection she had faced her whole life. With a hesitant breath, she nodded and followed the man as he turned and led her toward a building in the distance. The others watched her as she walked away, their eyes full of uncertainty. But she paid them no mind. She didn't care what they thought. She didn't care what anyone thought. For the first time, she was walking toward a future that was hers to shape. And it was a future filled with the unknown, but also the possibility of something new, something better, something that didn't involve rejection. The building the man led her to was a modest structure compared to the grand palaces and towering spires of the Titrians. But it was welcoming in its simplicity. The walls were made of reinforced concrete and steel, but the interior was warm with the soft glow of lights and the faint hum of machinery. The man opened the door for her and gestured for her to step inside. Nera hesitated for a moment, looking back at the colony. Behind her, the people still watched her from a distance. Some were whispering, others were staring with curiosity, but none of them dared approach. She felt a mix of relief and apprehension, but she knew there was no turning back now. She stepped inside, and the door closed behind her with a soft click. She found herself in a small but well-organized laboratory. Shelves lined the walls filled with books and equipment. Strange devices that she had never seen before cluttered the counters. But it was the man's presence that calmed her most. His calm demeanor and quiet confidence made her feel as though she could trust him despite the uncertainty that still lingered in her mind. He gestured for her to sit at a metal table across from him, and she did so hesitantly. He sat down opposite her and studied her for a moment, his expression softening. "You must be very confused," he said, his voice kind but firm. "I know you're not used to this place, but I'm not going to hurt you, I promise." Nera nodded, slowly, unsure of what to say. She didn't know how to explain herself to him or why she had come here, but there was something in his eyes that told her he wasn't going to judge her like her own people. Had she been rejected by her own kind, her own family, and now she had no choice but to rely on this stranger from a race that had always been considered inferior by her people. But something about him felt different. He wasn't afraid of her. He wasn't threatening her. He was offering help. She needed to make sense of this. She needed to understand why he was so willing to help someone like her. She swallowed hard before speaking in a soft voice. "Nera," she said, her voice shaky. "I didn't mean to come here. I didn't know where else to go." The man smiled gently. "It's all right," he said. "I'm Dr. Ethan Carter. I study biology and technology here on this colony. I don't know why you ended up here or what your people are like, but I can tell that you're not dangerous, not to us, not to anyone." He paused, as if trying to gauge her reaction. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" he said, his words full of understanding. She looked at him, surprised by his insight. He didn't seem afraid of her at all. No fear, no hesitation, just an open acceptance. It was almost foreign to her, this kindness. It was something she had never experienced before, and yet it felt so natural. The tears that had been building up in her chest threatened to spill over, but she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. She didn't want to seem weak in front of him. She didn't want to burden him with her pain. Dr. Carter watched her silently for a moment before continuing. "I don't know what kind of life you've had," he said, "but I do know that humans have always believed in the power of second chances. Here you'll find no judgment, no expectations. We value strength, but not just the kind you're born with, the kind that comes from within, the kind that pushes you to keep going even when the world tells you to give up. We've all faced struggles here on Earth, but we've learned that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves." Nora listened intently, his words resonating deep within her. For the first time, she felt like someone understood her. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outcast. She didn't feel like she was being judged for the things she couldn't control, the things that made her different. She wasn't sure what she was expecting when she arrived here, but it certainly wasn't this. It was strange to feel hope again. After so long she had been so used to the rejection and the isolation that the thought of acceptance seemed impossible. But this man, this human, was offering her something that she had never thought she would receive, a chance, a place where she didn't have to hide who she was. It was a glimmer of something new, something she had never dared to dream of before. Nora finally looked up at him, her voice steadier now. "I don't know what to do," she said. "I've never had a place before. I don't know if I can ever find it now, but I want to try." Carter nodded. "I believe you can," he said, his voice full of quiet determination. "We all have our struggles, Nora, but that doesn't mean we can't find a way to overcome them together." He started and moved toward one of the tables, gathering a few tools from the counters. "I'll help you get settled here," he said, "and I'll help you understand what you're capable of. I know you have strengths. They're just waiting to be discovered." Nora watched him with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty, her heart still heavy with doubt, but also with a spark of hope. Over the next few days, Nora began to adjust to her new surroundings. The small laboratory became a refuge for her, a place where she could begin to understand herself and the strange abilities that had always eluded her. Dr. Carter was patient with her. He never pushed her, but instead guided her through the process of discovering her strengths. He explained that humans had a different kind of power than the Cytrians, a power that came from the mind and the heart, the ability to adapt to challenges and find creative solutions. He said that it wasn't about raw strength or psychic abilities, but the will to push forward, even when everything seemed impossible. Nora listened closely as he taught her about the human way of thinking, about resilience and determination. He showed her books on human history and science, all filled with stories of survival against overwhelming odds, and it made her think deeply about her own life and the way she had been raised to view strength as something inherent and unchangeable. She had always believed that her worth was determined by what she could do with her psychic powers. But the more she learned about humanity, the more she realized that the true power came from within, from the choices people made and the sacrifices they were willing to endure for others. One afternoon, Carter led her into a training room where he had set up several devices designed to test her physical and mental limits. He had explained that the Cytrians valued their psychic powers above all else, but here on Earth humans had found ways to build strength through discipline and hard work without relying on abilities like telekinesis or telepathy. Nora hesitated at first, unsure of her capabilities, but Carter's encouragement pushed her forward. He started by showing her how to focus her energy through her body rather than through her mind. He taught her to move with purpose, to breathe deeply, and to channel her emotions into her actions. As she followed his instructions, she began to feel something she hadn't experienced before, a sense of control over her own body, over the movements that had always felt alien to her. At first, it was small, a subtle shift, but it was enough to spark a fire inside her. She was learning, she was adapting, And that small victory gave her hope for the first time in years. Nera began to train every day. Carter helped her with every step. He monitored her progress, carefully always pushing her to go further, but never forcing her beyond her limits. She was learning new techniques and developing new skills. But the most important lesson was learning to trust herself. For the first time, she wasn't relying on someone else to tell her who she was or what she could do. She was finding her own path. And it felt liberating. She started to develop her own sense of identity, a version of herself that wasn't defined by the rejection of her people, but by her own growth and resilience. As the days passed, she began to understand more about her abilities. She had always struggled with psychic powers. But here on Earth, she learned that her true strength wasn't in the mind alone. It was in the combination of mind, body, and spirit, the way humans were able to overcome limitations through sheer willpower, determination, and creativity. She began to experiment with her abilities, using her psychic powers in different ways than she had been taught. Her people had always valued perfection and control. But she learned that in the human way, there was room for mistakes and growth. There was room for exploration without judgment. Carter continued to encourage her to push herself, but never with the pressure that had suffocated her in the past. She realized that she wasn't just learning to control her powers, she was learning to control her own destiny, to choose the path she wanted to take. And with each passing day, she felt more confident in herself, more sure of her place in this new world. It wasn't easy. There were moments when self-doubt crept in, and she questioned whether she could ever truly belong here with the humans. But then she would remember the lessons Carter had taught her about resilience and the strength that came from overcoming fear and uncertainty. She had a long way to go. But for the first time in her life, Nera believed that maybe, just maybe, she could find a new purpose here, a purpose not defined by the limitations of her past, but by the possibilities of her future. As weeks passed, Nera's confidence grew with every small victory she achieved in the training room, in the lab, and in the simple interactions with the humans around her. At first, she had kept to herself, uncertain of how to connect with them, unsure of how they would view her. But Dr. Carter's encouragement had given her the courage to begin reaching out bit by bit. She started to join the small group of researchers who worked alongside him in the colony. They were kind and patient with her, and slowly she began to understand their way of life, their drive, their sense of community. They treated her as an equal, not as an outsider, not as something to be feared or rejected. And it was something she had never experienced before. She had been told her entire life that she was different, that she was less than them, that she was a failure in the eyes of her people. But here on Earth, in this strange new place, she began to feel that maybe those beliefs didn't have to define her anymore. Every day she spent with the humans made her more curious about them, their culture, their history, and the way they had built such a resilient society from the ground up. Despite their many flaws, they never gave up, they never stopped striving for something better. And that was something she could relate to more than she had ever realized. She began to see humans not as inferior beings, not as a race to be looked down upon, but as a source of inspiration. She saw their strength in their struggle, their ability to create something beautiful from nothing. And it reminded her that even she could do the same. After a month of training, Dr. Carter invited her to participate in a project with him, a new research initiative that aimed to explore the potential for combining human technology with alien biology. It was a chance for her to put her newfound skills to the test and contribute to something larger than herself. She felt both excited and nervous. But when she arrived at the lab that morning, Carter greeted her with his usual calm smile. He had never treated her like a fragile creature that needed to be protected. He had always treated her like an equal, and that made all the difference. He had never looked down on her for being different or for struggling. He had simply accepted her for who she was, and that acceptance gave her the courage to move forward with the project. She worked alongside humans, now using her abilities to help improve their technology, integrating her knowledge of alien biology with their advanced tools and resources. And for the first time in a long while, Nera felt like she was contributing in a way that mattered. She was part of something bigger than herself, and she could see the potential of the growth, not just for humanity, but for herself as well. But despite her progress, there were still moments when doubt crept in, when the weight of her past and the memories of her people's rejection threatened to overwhelm her. She would retreat into herself, sometimes, and question if she truly belonged here, or if she was just an outsider taking up space. But then Carter would remind her that growth was a journey, not a destination. He would remind her of the importance of resilience, the same lesson he had taught her all those weeks ago. And every time he did, she found the strength to keep going. She had learned to trust him and the humans around her, but most of all she had learned to trust herself. She wasn't the lost and broken alien that had fled her home world anymore. She was someone who had found a new path, a new purpose, and with every step she took, she felt stronger, more confident in who she was and where she was going. Even though she had been rejected by her own kind, she had found a new family here on Earth. And it was a family that valued her not for what she could do or what she had been born to be, but for who she had chosen to become. As Nura's work with the humans progressed, she found herself becoming more integrated into the fabric of their colony. She worked alongside them in the lab, in the field, and in the many small projects that made up their daily lives. The humans welcomed her as one of their own, even though she still struggled to fully let go of the fear and doubt that had been instilled in her by her people. They never saw her as an outsider or a lesser being. Instead, they saw her as a valuable contributor, someone with unique skills and insights to offer. Their work was difficult at times, the experiments were complex, and the challenges they faced were far from easy. But it was the humans' attitude toward failure that Nera found most intriguing. They didn't fear it, they embraced it. They saw it as a stepping stone to success. And that perspective changed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. At first, she had been terrified of failing, afraid that if she made one mistake, it would be the end for her, that the humans would cast her aside, just like her people had. But instead, she found that when she stumbled, when she faltered, they were there to help her up, to encourage her to keep going without judgment. It was a strange sensation to her, but it was also liberating. They weren't just giving her a second chance, they were giving her the freedom to grow without the burden of perfection. They were teaching her that it was okay to make mistakes, that growth came not from avoiding failure, but from learning how to overcome it. In the evenings, when the work in the lab was done, Nera often sat outside the colony with the humans who had become her new friends. They would sit in a circle around a small fire, talking about their hopes and dreams, their fears, and their pasts. She listened to their stories, their struggles, their triumphs. And for the first time she began to understand the depth of the human spirit, their resilience, their ability to face adversity head-on and keep moving forward. No matter how many times they were knocked down, the conversations were always candid, always open. They never shied away from their vulnerabilities or their imperfections. Instead, they shared them freely, as if acknowledging their flaws made them stronger. And it was in these moments that Nora truly felt like she belonged. She began to open up too, telling them about her life, her past, and the fear she had carried with her for so long. She told them about the rejection she had faced from her own kind, the sense of failure that had haunted her every day. And though it was difficult to admit even to herself, she told them about the part of her that still feared she would never be enough. She feared that she wasn't capable of becoming something more than the person her people had rejected. But with each story she shared, she found herself feeling lighter, as though the weight she had carried for so long was beginning to lift. She realized that it wasn't just the humans who had helped her heal. It was her own willingness to face her fears, to confront the darkness inside her, and let it go piece by piece. It was a long and painful process, but with every step forward, she felt a little more at peace with herself. She knew that she wasn't fully healed, yet that the journey was far from over. But for the first time in her life, she felt hopeful. She had found something among the humans that she had never known before: acceptance, a place where she didn't have to hide who she was or what she had been. She didn't have to pretend to be something she wasn't here. She was free to be herself. And that freedom was more powerful than anything she had ever known. As the weeks passed, Nera became more confident in her role within the colony. She took on more responsibilities, helping lead projects and guiding new recruits. She began to mentor others, just as Dr. Carter had mentored her. And in doing so, she found herself growing even more as a person. She learned to trust in her own abilities, her own judgment, and to see herself as something more than the sum of her past mistakes. She had become a symbol of resilience, not just for the humans, but for herself as well. And though she had once thought she would always be an outsider, always be different, she had come to realize that her differences were not something to be ashamed of. They were something to be celebrated, because they made her who she was. And that person was strong, capable, and worthy of belonging. One day, as Nero worked in the lab, she received a message from Dr. Carter asking her to meet him in the main conference room. There was something urgent he needed to discuss with her. She had been working tirelessly on a new project involving the integration of alien and human technology, and she had grown used to the quiet routine of her life. But Carter's message sent a ripple of unease through her stomach. She wasn't sure what to expect. When she arrived at the conference room, she saw the worried expressions on his face and the faces of the other researchers gathered there. She sat down at the table, her heart pounding, as she waited for Carter to explain what was going on. He looked at her with a serious expression, and for the first time since they had met, she saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Nera, there's something you need to know," he began, his voice steady, but with an edge of concern. "We've just received a communication from your people that planning something big, something dangerous. We're not sure exactly what it is, but it involves your species and ours. We need your help to figure out what's going on and how we can stop it." Nara's stomach dropped at the mention of her people. She had spent so long trying to distance herself from her past, trying to build a future here with the humans. And now they were reaching out to her with news of something ominous, something that could threaten everything she had worked so hard to create. The thought of facing her people again filled her with dread. She had no desire to return to the world that had rejected her, no desire to face the judgment of those who had cast her aside. But she knew this wasn't something she could ignore. The stakes were too high. She had learned from the humans that when something was wrong, you didn't just turn away, you faced it head on. And she couldn't let the fear of her past control her future. She had come too far for that. Carter could see the conflict in her eyes and placed a hand on the table near hers. "I know this is hard," he said softly, "but we need you more than ever now. You've already proven your strength and your courage by coming here, by embracing the unknown. We know you're capable of this, Nero. We know you have the power to make a difference." She hesitated for a long moment. The memories of her people flooded her mind, their rejection, their cruelty, their unwavering belief in their superiority. But then she looked around the room at the faces of the humans who had become her family, the people who had accepted her, without question the people who had helped her grow, and she realized that she couldn't let her past dictate her future. Not anymore. She had a responsibility now to the people who had shown her kindness, to the world she had chosen to be a part of. And she wasn't about to let that go. She took a deep breath and nodded, her decision firm. "I'll help," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "I'll help you figure out what they're planning, and I'll do whatever it takes to stop it." She could see the relief in Carter's eyes as he smiled in response. "Thank you, Nara," he said, his voice filled with gratitude and determination. "You've already proven yourself in ways we could never have imagined. And now we need you more than ever." Nora stood up from the table, her mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. She had always thought that her greatest battle would be against herself, but now she was faced with a new challenge, one that would test everything she had learned and everything she had become. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face it. She had come a long way from the broken alien who had stumbled into the human colony so many months ago. Now, she was strong, confident, and determined to protect the people who had shown her the way. And if that meant confronting her own kind and standing against them, then so be it. She had already fought the hardest battle of all, the battle to accept herself, and now she would fight for a future where she could truly belong. Nira stood at the edge of the colony, staring out at the horizon, her thoughts consumed by the mission ahead. She knew the stakes were high. If her people were planning something dangerous, if their intentions were truly harmful, there would be no turning back. But she also knew that she couldn't allow fear to hold her back. She had come too far to let the past dictate her actions. She had learned that true strength came from confronting the unknown and from choosing to fight for the future. She believed in Carter, joined her a few moments later, his presence a silent reassurance. He didn't say anything at first, simply standing beside her as they both took in the vast landscape around them. The weight of what they were about to face hung in the air between them. But it wasn't oppressive. It was a shared understanding that whatever came next, they would face it together. After a few minutes, Carter spoke quietly. "We've got a plan, Naira," he said. "The humans are preparing for whatever comes next. We've set up a secure network to monitor the communications from your people. and we'll be ready to respond if things escalate. We just need you to help us understand them better. You know their ways, their tactics, their strategies." He paused and turned to face her, his gaze intense. "But warm, you're the key to understanding them, Nera. You have the knowledge we need to outsmart them." Nera nodded, her mind already working through the details of the plan. She knew her people better than anyone, and that knowledge would be invaluable in the coming confrontation. But even as she prepared herself to help, she couldn't shake the unease that lingered in her chest. The memories of her time among the Excitrians were not easily forgotten. The harsh words, the cold glances, the sense of superiority that had shaped every interaction. But now she saw them in a different light. She wasn't just the alien girl who had been cast aside. She was someone with power, someone who had fought to create a new identity. And now she was going to use that power to protect those she cared about. The mission would be dangerous. There was no denying that. But Nera wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't afraid of the Excitrians, and she wasn't afraid of herself. As the days passed, Nera worked tirelessly with Dr. Carter and the rest of the human team to prepare for the confrontation. They studied the Excitrian technology and communication methods, piecing together the fragments of information they received from the intercepted transmissions. They developed strategies for neutralizing the potential threat, and Nera helped them understand the psychological and cultural factors that influenced the Excitrians' decision-making. She became more and more certain that her people were not just preparing for war, they were preparing to dominate Earth, and that knowledge gave her the clarity she needed to act. She wasn't just fighting for the humans anymore. She was fighting for her own future, for the chance to build something better than what she had left behind. The day finally came when the Excitrians made their move. The message was clear: their ships were approaching Earth, and they were demanding surrender. Nara stood beside Carter and the rest of the team as they prepared to respond. It was time to act, time to put everything they had learned to the test, time to protect everything they had fought for. Carter turned to her, his voice calm but firm. "This is it, Nera," he said. "We're ready when you are." Nera took a deep breath and stepped forward into the command center, her mind focused and steady. She had learned to trust herself and her instincts, and now she had to lead the humans to victory. She spoke with authority, explaining the strategy they had developed, outlining the steps they needed to take, and guiding them through the initial stages of the defense. The Excitrians were strong, but they didn't know Earth as the humans did, and that would be their advantage. The battle was long and intense, but the humans' determination proved stronger than the Excitrians' arrogance, and after hours of fierce conflict, the invaders were forced to retreat. Nara stood victorious, watching as the Excitrian ships left Earth's atmosphere, her heart racing with adrenaline, but also with a profound sense of relief. They had done it. They had protected the colony, and the future they had built together. The humans had won. But Nera had won something even more important. She had found her place in this world, not as an outsider, but as an integral part of a community that valued her for who she was, not what she had been. She had faced her past and her fears, and she had chosen to fight for a future that was hers to create. Now, she knew that she had truly found hope among the humans, and it was something she would never let go of.